All right. Hello, one and all. I am Too Many Curls, and this is our first Fic Night as fanfictalk.com. And today we are reading Noble Work by Magic Space Hole. And this is a Tom Riddle story. And just a second, my phone is somewhere loud and vibrating. I am going to give this a read. You can find the story at fanfictalk.com. I will say that it's very good, so get ready. All right, 1943. He had to be sure. He had to. It wasn't that he didn't have confidence in his own abilities. Far from it, in fact. He knew he was more than capable of pulling it off. But if he was going to leave behind what he considered to be his life's work, or at least the work he had done up to the age of 16, which, in his defense, was considerably more than most, he wanted to make damn sure the thing was going to do what it was supposed to. Admittedly, there was a slight chance that he had miscalculated the amplitude of transmigrational sentience, and had, in fact, launched what would probably be a confused, quite distraught copy of his 16-year-old consciousness into the boundless void between dimensions. But it was unlikely. He was so far down the rabbit hole with this one that, at one point, the only thing he could do was make sure that the colors and sounds that emanated from his dear old diary and the ritual vaguely matched what memory mechanics and manipulation and magic had said. The object should now be glowing a bright cerulean blue, akin to a midday sky. Blue was blue, close enough, check. The proximal space around the object should increase in temperature, peaking at a balmy 41 degrees. Well, it felt warm, and it wasn't melting. Check. Finally, the odor emanating from the object should approximate your earliest and fondest childhood memories. What the hell was that supposed to mean? The sweet smell of not getting killed by German bombs? He didn't bother. Once the ritual was complete, he set the book down on the ground. Then he decided the ground was too wet and picked it back up. Then he set it down again, determining that a little dampness was fine, since he'd purposely made the damn thing indestructible, and if it couldn't handle a little wet, then it had no business doing any of this at all. He opened the book and awkwardly knelt down to make his mark upon a random page with the battered infin ink quill he kept in his pocket. Then he stepped back, took out his wand, and stopped. He picked up the book again and propped it up at the foot of Salazar's statue to give it some height, thinking it might be better to see what was happening from there. Would it? Would the apparition be visible? He had no idea. His obsessive compulsion for perfect staging satisfied, he finally whispered the incantation and stepped back with excitement. The pages of the diary started to turn rapidly, as if they were being blown by a strong wind. A humming sound filled the chamber, and the book began to glow with a sinister white light. A bit much, Tom thought to himself. He was perfectly fine with flashy and dramatic displays of magic, but not when he was trying to get something done, and not when there were. Sorry, I keep losing my spot. And not when there was no one around to be impressed by his showmanship. The light grew brighter, gaining in intensity until he had to look away. Covering his eyes, he went over the steps again in his head to make sure he'd gotten it right. There was no mention in the book of a blinding light or a humming sound. But then, most how-to books on magic tended to leave out a considerable amount of extremely useful details, short of, oh, by the way, the side effect, you die. Suddenly, he heard a loud thump. He removed his hand from his eyes, attempted to fan away the explosion of smoke that had filled the air, and then cursed loudly. He'd been expecting a disembodied voice, or a ball of light maybe, even a floating book that looked like a talking mouth would have been acceptable. What he did not expect was a copy of himself, a complete and relatively accurate specter that looked exactly like him, except for the translucent glow and slightly overdramatic hovering effect. The book Tom stood and wiped the metaphysical dirt off his metaphysical clothes, glanced around the chamber, looked at Tom with what Tom chose to believe was a highly uncharacteristic and therefore inaccurate air of pomposity, and said, So, non metaphysical Tom. They stared at each other for a while. Tom was wondering how this was going to go. Would it have the same memories? Would it be capable of strategy and manipulation? Would he have to teach it English? Meanwhile, the other Tom looked around the chamber with casual interest, adjusting to the painful reality of being yanked into sudden existence with a half-hearted huh. Do you know who you are? Tom asked expectantly. I am you, said Book Tom. Good so far. It was sentient. It had self-awareness. It was even looking at him with a judgmental sneer, which indicated higher thought. Do you remember your purpose? He asked, saying the words slowly as if talking to a child. The spectre did not reply. It seemed preoccupied with itself, himself now. Feel, Feeling, did he feel, his hair, straightening his jacket, giving his prefect's badge a quick metaphysical polish. Tom didn't want to push it. Despite his brilliance, even he had to admit that he was marginally out of his depth when it came to discourse with sentient memory ghosts that had been vomited out of books. He tried to gather his thoughts, still reeling over the mirror image of himself hovering effortlessly over the grimy floor of the chamber. Is there a point to this meeting? Book Tom asked suddenly, picking at the theoretical nails of one hand with a high-class, Slytherin-esque nonchalance that Tom himself couldn't even muster. Tom approached him slowly. Yes, I need to be sure that you will carry out the duty to which you are assigned. Do you remember your purpose? He repeated. Book Tom thought for a moment, tilted his head, and then finally said, Yes. Tom waited. And what is your purpose? He demanded, after half a minute of silence. To complete Salazar Slytherin's noble work, the image said simply. More silence. Are you going to expand upon that? The spectre smirked at him. Must I? Tom's patience was wearing thin, and his hands were going numb from exposure to the chamber's freezing underground air. He wanted to finish this, quickly. Tell me this. Do you have my memories? Which memories are those? The ones in which you spent 5 whole years looking for a chamber that was specifically designed for you to find right away? Or the ones in which you were given control of a highly intelligent and deadly beast and only managed to terrorize 1 or 2 mudbloods over the course of an entire term? Tom felt a surge of rage bubbling up and tried to calm himself. You were made, he said through gritted teeth, to take up the cause of fulfilling the chamber's purpose, should I not succeed. Obviously, Book Tom began to hover. I believe I understand the situation, and after keen and thorough assessment, I have determined that you are both wise and foolish. I'm sorry? It seems that you possess some impressive wisdom to have created me the way you did. For you must have known somewhere in your subconscious that you, original you, would not have the strength of character and skill required to complete the work. Pardon? So you made me, Book Tom continued, an entity capable of succeeding where you yourself would have undoubtedly failed. Wise. I did not make you to, and, he interrupted, you've seen fit to summon me immediately upon the event of my incorporeal birth without hesitation, without proper preliminary examination of the object you created, or any sort of analysis of the risk involved in activating said object, which could have done a number of things to you had you gotten it wrong. Foolish. If you ever had the chance of completing the noble work in the first, Don't talk to me about the noble fucking work, you bloody wanker. Tom shouting echoed through the chamber. Wanker, wanker, wanker. Book Tom's face was indiscernible. He didn't seem angry or offended. He just floated there, blank, vaguely glowing, like a dying, judgmental streetlight. I see, he said. They stood there for an indeterminate amount of time, arms crossed, attempting to out-sneer each other. Somewhere nearby, a basilisk chirped. But I didn't get it wrong, did I? Tom said after a good long sneer. Sorry? You said I could have gotten it wrong, but I didn't. I never get it wrong. Anyway, you have my memories. You know why I can no longer trust the outcome to fate. Ah, yes, Book Tom muttered. The Horcruxes. Still on that, are you? Of course I am. It's the only way forward. Are you still going to use Dad for the first one? Book Tom asked with a wicked smile. Tom smiled back, naturally. Kick him in the teeth for me. 1947. Book Tom was a snarky bastard. Tom knew this going in, but if he had any chance of keeping his diary Horcrux safe, he needed to make sure his diary Horcrux knew how to keep itself safe. He was leaving the country. His hasty and impulsive murder of Hepzibah Smith, despite being overwhelmingly therapeutic, threw his entire timetable out of whack. Now he had to find a way to keep his diary hidden, but close to Hogwarts. Without being able to hide it inside the school himself, he had to leave it behind, which meant he had to talk to the damn thing. Setting the book down on the dingy kitchen table and forcing himself with all of the will he could muster to not lose his temper, he raised his wand and performed the incantation. Why am I not at the school? The teenage version of himself asked, sitting on the counter and crossing his non-existent arms, the perfect model of a judgmental prick head to toe. Ah, just as Tom remembered. He scanned his surroundings and turned up his nose at the state of the tiny apartment. Where the hell are we? In my flat, said the older Tom, patience already dangerously thin. Don't get used to it. We won't be here long. Book Tom, who hadn't been spoken to in almost 5 years, was quick to express his distaste at length. And I don't remember derelict accommodations and cheap, shoddy furniture being part of our 5-year plan, friend. Tom ignored his jibes, wondering with great concern how he had accomplished so much between the ages of 16 and 18, given that, if Book Tom was anything to go by, he was, without a doubt, a complete and utter arsehole. You have been made into a Horcrux, he stated. As such, I will need to ensure you are kept safe and hidden while I travel. Book Tom's brow furrowed in confusion. I have questions, he said. I thought you might, but I'm not here to answer your questions. You pompous, disembodied little shit, Tom continued in his head. Book Tom ignored with expert-level pomposity, raising a finger to make a point, like a 16-year-old college professor whose tenure was paid in units of sarcasm. It just doesn't seem very logical or strategic. I thought you were going to use our father to make the first Horcrux. Tom rolled his eyes. I was, but things did not go according to plan. Well, obviously, if you were the one making the plans, do not. Tom stopped himself and took a second to calm down, pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. Do not speak, he continued, unless you have something constructive to say. Book Tom seemed to nod in understanding until, who makes a Horcrux out of a book anyway? Highly degradable. Tom's hands twitched towards the wand in his pocket. You know I enchanted the book to be indestructible. Oh, yes, I forgot. The one time you actually covered your bases. Well done, you. Tom slammed the diary shut, but Book Tom stayed put, using the moment of silence to glance pointedly around the flat again, with as much utter distaste as he could manage to fit on his metaphysical face. Why are you traveling in the first place? He asked after a while. What did you do? It's none of your concern. Incorrect. Everything is my concern. The bloody ego on him, Tom thought, ignoring the fact that he often used to hit his followers with the same logic, using the exact same phrase and the exact same tone, and may or may not still do currently. What did you do? Book Tom asked again. Tom did not answer. What did you do? The spectre repeated, dragging out the do like a 4-year-old child. Not that it is relevant to you, but I made a slight miscalculation, all right? I am taking care of it. Book Tom paused for a moment, thinking. Then he said, I would say that I'm not surprised, but we both know that I would not be surprised, so we can cut out the pretense. At any rate, I assume you have summoned me to ask for my help. No, I'm giving you a warning because, as I've said, you've been made into a Horcrux, and I can't leave you lying around. How many Horcruxes do you have floating around out there now anyway? 3. Book Tom's mouth dropped open slightly. 3? Good lord. What does that do to your soul? Is it like a fractional sort of situation? Are you down to an eighth now? Or does it sort of just stretch out like dough? Tom ignored him and moved on. I am leaving you with a trusted ally, and when he deems the time is right, he will return you to the school so that you may wreak havoc on the mudbloods there. Yeah, about that. No, it's just no. Well, it's really not the highest priority, killing mudbloods, is it? We are not discussing this, Tom growled. Book Tom backed away and put his hands up in mock surrender, sporting an impressively subtle smirk. All right, Lord. Calm down. Don't lose your nose about it. I'll do the bloody job. Thank you. There was a minute of silence during which both Toms stared at each other in mutual loathing, so strong that even the muggles downstairs could feel it, though it only came across to them as a mildly disconcerting sense of futility, which they naturally shrugged off in a characteristically British way. Book Tom dared to speak first. You know, if I'm a Horcrux, we'll always be connected, tethered to each other, as it were. I'm not sure I can handle an eternity with. Tom threw the entire kitchen at him. 1955. Who are you leaving me with? An ally. Book Tom snorted. Ally? We don't have any allies. You don't. You're nothing more than a collection of memories stored in a book that I strongly regret making. Book Tom ignored this in a characteristic Book Tom fashion. You look old. How old are you? That's irrelevant. Old then. Must be disappointing. He had taken a seat. He had taken a seat in Tom's high-backed chair, non-existent, feet up, on the desk like he owned the fucking place. Youthful cheekbones that Tom had long since lost, glowing offensively in the dark. What's disappointing? Tom demanded, wishing his younger self was solid so he could curse him into oblivion. Book Tom shrugged. That you've spent years studying the deepest recesses of magic, concocting this elaborate plan to tether yourself to Earth and become immortal, and yet you still age. Tom threw the book into the fire. Somewhere in the infinite darkness of space, 3 galaxies away, a very confused teenage Tom Riddle floated haughtily through the void, wondering whom he could possibly blame for this one. The end.
Yay! It just has me giggling throughout the whole thing. Oh, it's so brilliant. And I just love, like, the believability of it, you know?
Oh, yeah. No.
Do you know what I mean? Especially when, like, we already knew that Tom didn't really regard the diary as something he was overly proud of. Like, it was kind of a practice thing. He wasn't really happy with it. Is this why?
I like to think so. And I like that it's an example of him, like, not being an expert at magic And it's
Yeah,
just, I'm like, what does this do? Whoa, that's what
yeah.
that does.
Just relying on his own. I'm brilliant. I got this.
And then like really not having it.
Exactly. Oh, I love it so much. And even just seeing himself reflected in the diary, like, am I really like that? Is that really me? Oh goodness. So what was the initial inspiration for this story?
Well, I was I was watching Chamber of Secrets, as you do, and I had the thought that, you know, maybe Tom shoving all his memories into the diary might have happened separately from it becoming a Horcrux. I realized that if that's the case, then he probably would have wanted to test it to see if it worked. And how ridiculous would it be if he was actually made to confront himself in all of his arrogance? Like, what a conversation that would be. And then it just sort of happened.
So good. And you totally set up the beginnings of like an AU where Tom changes because he's like seeing what he's really like and it inspires change. That's so funny. It's something that I never thought of before, but you know what? Like that's canon for me now. um, but like speaking of canon, it just has such a perfect mix of something that's so believable with something that, probably didn't really happen. But how do you find that balance between like sticking to what seems really true, but also being kind of like original?
Well, it helps to really have a deep understanding of canon. And I have been writing for the past, I want to say 6 months, a 7-book history on the idiot. So I had a lot of I had a lot of knowledge about canon. And so when you have that floating around in your head, you can kind of really mess with it and wonder like, well, if I shift this to the left, if I shift this to the right, I could probably create something different. But yeah, and humor is pretty much all I can write anymore. So it just came out as humor.
It's done really well. You mean like a 7-book history on Tom Riddle?
Yeah, it might actually exist someday, I'm hoping. But
Can you tell us more?
Okay, well, technically, I have all 7 books planned out, and they have to be 7. But in reality, there's 6. All 6 in Tom's point of view, and the 7th in Dumbledore's point of view. And I have a significant amount of the first one written, I would say between birth and the day he meets Albus Dumbledore. But I don't have everything written. So, I can outline, I can write some scenes, but I'm still trying to put it all together. It's just going to take a while.
Yeah, sounds like a very ambitious project, but I'm really excited for that.
So is book 1 going to be your NaNoWriMo project?
I was thinking about it, yeah, but I haven't signed up yet.
Well, I'm not full time.
I know.
And even if you miss the November 1 date, there's still time.
Yeah, I should probably do that.
Do it. Definitely make a nest on the forums. Get into it because I need to know more about this.
Yeah, no, 7 books about Tom Riddle, especially given how you wrote him in this 2,600 words. I need to have that.
Definitely. And that kind of leads me on to my next question, because Noble Work is the only story you have on the archives at the moment. Are you looking to upload anything else soon? Have you got something else in the works apart from the ambitious project?
Shit. Okay. So this is going to sound weird. Last month, my grandmother died. And I know, where's this story going? And during that whole process of having to drive home and see all my family, I needed a distraction. And so I posted on Reddit, give me your most ridiculous scenarios involving Tom Riddle in horribly humorous and painful situations. And Reddit provided. And so I have a 13-chapter prompt collection called Unfortunate Circumstances, a compendium that I have not gotten around to putting on the archive yet. And just to distract me even more from my 7-book story, I have now started another Tom Riddle story called Bad Education, in which he actually gets hired to work as a teacher at Hogwarts and realizes what a horrible idea it was. So that's actually my current project. I'm probably going to post chapter 5 tomorrow, I'm hoping, but I want to get them on the archive as soon as possible.
Please do.
Yes, definitely.
Oh my goodness. Well, I've got one more question for you. You know, obviously you can get into Tom's head really, really well. What's your strategy for getting into a character's head? I need tips.
Well, I mean, like I said, knowing canon and doing a lot of character studies for the long fic really helped, but also kind of, I feel like he and I sort of have the same asshole vibe, maybe. I don't know. Like, it's hard to explain, really. But he's my favorite character. And to most people, I think he's a very two-dimensional villain. But I really like the idea of villains having unique backstories that don't get fleshed out very much, so that I can go ahead and do that myself. And that's kind of where I look at how he was in canon, and then I look at what his environmental circumstances were, and then I'm an analyst by trade, so I kind of do an actual analysis, a character analysis, and that's kind of how I come up with what would be going on in his head at any given moment. I don't know if that helps, but
No, that makes sense. And yeah, you've done a fantastic job. It's such a good story.
Thank you.
It looks like Carl's a fan of Awkward Tom. So I really also like how you wrote about the magic that he used, because that's an area that I just absolutely suck at coming up with ideas for writing about new descriptions of magic. And I thought you did a really good job writing about spells in a way that sounded realistic and that wasn't just like garbly-gook Latin, and it seemed like yeah, I buy that.
There's a secret to it. If you go online and you research or you look up anything between theoretical physics and quantum mechanics and just grab some words that you find and then magicize them a little bit, it sounds legit. No
That's
joke.
a good
It
tip.
really does.
Those aren't in my wheelhouse.
I love
That explains why all the science people tend to come up with the best spells.
Yep.
Well, awesome. I don't think I have any more questions. Do you have anything else that you want to say about the piece or what you're working on?
I don't think so. I think I actually blabbed about everything on my list right now. So.
Well, awesome. Well, okay, I do have one question for you, not necessarily related to your work, but about Tom Riddle.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I have to pre-ask, have you read Cursed Child?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, what do you think about him and Bellatrix?
Okay. Here's how I see it. So, if you remember, Dumbledore specifically said that even though he had a certain number of Horcruxes and he had a certain destructive level to his soul, he was still competent. He was still mentally competent. And I really think that that's kind of the key to it being possible. But I also kind of just wiped it from my head. So I don't really, I mean, if I have to try to remember it, that's kind of what I say. Like,
I mean, is it going to be part of your 7 books?
Hell no. But no, I think my books are probably going to end. Well, the 6th one will end in 1981, and then the Dumbledore one will just trace him finding all of those memories. So I have no idea when that'll end.
Okay,
But,
so no
That'd be
Bellatrix
cool.
boning and baby producing.
yeah, but like that never bothered me. The idea of them having sex like never bothered me. It's
Yeah.
just the fact that like it had to be made into a story, I guess, was what really bothered me.
Mhm.
So, you know.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Yeah, so I think with that we can call it a fic night. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.